Thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on the upcoming immigration changes as well as accreditation that comes in next year. We have some attendees over our Zoom webinar as well as on Facebook Live today, so thank you for joining us wherever you are. Before we kick in, I will just do a brief bit of housekeeping. So as always, the recording of the session will be available afterwards on the MyHR website, on Facebook and on our YouTube channel as well. Any questions that you do ask during the course of the session will obviously be recorded. So please make sure you're only sharing information that you'd be comfortable having in a public space. And if you would like your question to be anonymous, please tell us at the start of your question so we don't accidentally share any names or details that you wouldn't be comfortable sharing. We will answer the questions that you put through at the end of today's session in a Q&A format. So if you do have questions, you are very, very welcome to put them in as we go through the session today, but we will be answering them at the end. So again, if you think of something towards the end of today's conversation that you'd like to ask, please do just drop it through when we get to the Q&A session later today. So we are joined by a special guest today. Fabian from New Zealand Shores is one of their licensed immigration advisors. So I'll introduce New Zealand Shores to those of you who haven't worked with them before, and I'll do a brief introduction for Fabian as well before we kick into our content today. So New Zealand Shores are a New Zealand business that supports migrants and people who are looking to come to New Zealand. We've partnered with them for over 6 years now, so we've been working with the team there for quite a long time. They started out as a home-based business over 10 years ago, and they're now one of the largest, most reputable immigration consultancies in New Zealand. With a team of 8 licensed immigration advisors and several support staff, like I said, they provide a wide range of expertise. Some of their team are ex-immigration case officers, which means they have really useful knowledge from both sides of the visa application process. With their main office in Hamilton, they also have a branch in Nelson, and they're shortly looking to open up a branch in South Africa, which is very exciting. The team at New Zealand Shores address all kinds of immigration matters, but the core of their business is helping families relocate to New Zealand permanently and supporting New Zealand businesses with accreditation and visa services for their staff as well. So Fabian was a new migrant once. He came to New Zealand with his family in 2010 and has been working in immigration with New Zealand Shores for the last 5 years. He's now a proud New Zealand citizen. We're very happy to have you, Fabian, and he's assisted hundreds of families to make the move across to New Zealand, largely through skilled employment, but also through partnership and study pathways. More recently, he's been part of the company's efforts to raise awareness of the upcoming immigration changes, and he's also had the opportunity to discuss these changes with several dozen New Zealand businesses across all industries. So he's the perfect person to be joining me on this webinar today to talk about these changes. So Fabian, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks a lot, Sylvie. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, pleasure. Look, there's a lot to cover today, so we'll get stuck in. Why is the government looking to make changes to the accreditation program? What's the context?
So before the why, let's tackle the what. What is the biggest change? A lot of our guests today have either a rough or a detailed idea of what's coming, but I'll say a few words about this anyway. It is one of the largest changes in recent immigration history, mandatory accreditation, that is. It's what we're looking at is a pre-approval by Immigration New Zealand for companies to support work visa applications. So the baseline requirements will be around, as a company, being a genuinely operating registered business with a history of compliance with immigration, but also employment standards, and documented processes to minimize the risk of exploitation. So also at play, of course, is financial sustainability. If your company is not sustainable, then the work visa application that you support may not be sustainable as a result. There will be different accreditation levels. High volume accreditation will be for employers who need 6 or more migrants at any given time, 6 or more international workers. These larger companies will also require to show a commitment to improving pay and conditions for all their employees over time. And in addition, it's not quite a third category, it's more additional requirements for certain types of businesses like labor hire and franchises, for example. There will be an increased check on compliance for these types of businesses, mainly because by nature, they have less control over the internal practices and the cost pressures. So why? The goal, and I'm quoting the government on that, is to reduce New Zealand's reliance on lower paid temporary workers to better address productivity, skills and infrastructure challenges, and to increase the skill level of migrants. So that's the whole idea behind that mandatory accreditation. The scale of the change, as I mentioned, is quite massive. It's going to impact directly or indirectly roughly 22,000 New Zealand businesses, employing around 200,000 international workers. And those figures are from December last year. So a big change, like I said, and what the government is doing, essentially, they're completely changing their stance on using migrant workers. They're moving away from a migrant-led system towards an employer-led system. So before those changes, a migrant gets a job, applies for a visa, Immigration New Zealand checks the company and the migrant credentials as part of the application. But with the change, it is employers who will actually be leading the process. First, they'll have to request pre-approval to bring in international workers. So this is known as the employer check, which is essentially the accreditation. Then as a second step, there will be a job check by Immigration New Zealand. Does the company hold accreditation? Is employment acceptable? 30 hours minimum per week, pay at market rate, that sort of thing. And lastly, are there any suitable New Zealand citizens or residents available to do the job? So that last part is referred to as the labour market test. Then only then the migrant will be able to apply for a work visa. But let's have a look at 3 goals in detail, as explained by the government's brochure. So their intention is threefold. First, combat migrant exploitation. So by shifting some of that compliance verification on the employer prior to a visa application, the government is hoping to tackle some of the issues that migrants have been facing, with people getting underpaid or stuck in low-skilled roles, for example. Second, the government wants to encourage businesses to train, upskill, and hire New Zealanders as an absolute priority. So these criteria will actually involve ongoing professional development and training efforts as part of the assessment for an accreditation application. So it's not only about streamlining visas, it's also about encouraging New Zealand businesses to continuously train up New Zealanders. Third, the government wants to make it easier for businesses and regions to actually fill genuine skill shortages. So for the job check I've just mentioned, some waivers will apply for certain regions or occupations, which means it will be harder to get visas for positions that can be filled by New Zealanders, but it should be easier to fill positions for which there is a genuine and recognized shortage. So ultimately, by moving some of the employer verification across to the accreditation application, so early on, the work visa application itself should be quicker to process, and that will be to the workers' benefit, bringing a lot more certainty in the visa process. So in a nutshell, these are the reasons why the government is looking to make these changes: better compliance, prioritization of New Zealanders' employment, and streamlined visa processing on the other end of the line.
Wonderful, thank you. There's a lot of information to take in there, so I'm sure we'll be getting lots of questions coming through from attendees on the webinar later on. What's the time frame for these changes? What are we looking at? This change has been in the air since early 2019. So that mandatory accreditation was first documented early 2019, with the government giving bits and pieces of what this was going to look like. Actual implementation was initially planned about a year ago, mid-2020, but was put on hold due to the COVID pandemic. They had other priorities, obviously. Early 2021, early this year, Immigration New Zealand provided some firm dates. So firm to be taken with a pinch of salt. Initial implementation was to be November 1st. So that was going to be the cutoff date this year. And that would have seen mandatory accreditation, but also the phasing out of several work visa categories. 2 weeks ago, radical shift from the government, last minute announcement. We really did not expect that. This is postponed to mid-2022. So that, I guess in a way, it's a really good news, because this was a bit last minute considering everything else that's happening in the business. And it actually gives employers a lot more time to prepare.
But one thing we're pretty convinced of is it's not an if, it's a when. We really don't see the change of date as a sign that the government is getting cold feet or having second thoughts on the policy. We believe a likely explanation for the delay is that the massive IT rollout that was planned as a platform for this new accreditation is not quite ready. As part of the process, this new IT platform is meant to directly connect several government bodies to retrieve company information to make it easier and quicker to process accreditation. But the recent cybersecurity issues that impacted New Zealand have probably also likely prompted the government to double up on the security front and make sure the IT infrastructure was safe and ready to go. So in a nutshell, again, current timeframe, policy released anytime now. It's on the minister's desk waiting to be signed off. Mandatory accreditation going live 2022. The actual accreditation portal opening date is yet to be confirmed. This was meant to be September, but likely delayed a little bit. And the phasing out of certain existing work visa categories is also to be confirmed. So from November 1st, we should be able to continue applying for the usual essential skills, for example.
Wonderful, thank you. And this is a big question, but what effect do you think these changes are going to have on New Zealand's labour market with an existing skills shortage that's been exacerbated by the border closures?
Well, a goal again on the large scale, looking at this long-term and holistically, it's all about really alleviating the pressure on New Zealand businesses for cases where there's a genuine skill shortage. So making it easier to bring in overseas talents for those genuine skill shortage. But it's also about ongoing training of New Zealanders to, once again, long-term make sure we've got a reliable onshore skill set. The impact for migrants, those changes won't really have much of an impact for migrants. The requirements for the work visa application will largely remain the same. If an employer can secure the skill set they need onshore, it will do so, and a migrant with the same skill set might struggle to secure work. But likewise, if the migrant skill set is in demand and an employer is unable to obtain it in New Zealand, they will definitely have a shot at a work visa application. They will still need to meet health requirements, character requirements, and to be deemed qualified or competent in the role offered. No change there. This said, look, unemployment has hardly ever been so low across almost all industries. I think it's currently sitting at 4.5 or 4.7. And we know from getting calls every day that employers are crying out for staff, which they cannot source onshore. And they've been unable to bring anyone from overseas as a result of border restrictions. Not quite anyone, but it's obviously severely restricted. So yeah, everyone's looking forward to borders reopening, that's for sure. So for migrants, not much of a change. For businesses, there will be extra work required on compliance. That's the whole idea around tackling migrant exploitation and poor business practices. But look, beyond immigration, regularly reviewing your paperwork and your internal practices is always a good thing anyway for your business. I'm sure, Sylvie, you'll agree with that. So it's something you should be doing anyway. It might become a bit harder to source offshore staff if there's an existing pool of talents in New Zealand, but then again, you'd probably hire a Kiwi if you could find one. What we'll see on the other end is a more streamlined process for solid businesses that represent low immigration risk and need those high value workers that they cannot find in New Zealand. So yeah, these would be the main impact for businesses. Just a quick word about sector agreements and regional variation. The new accreditation system is also meant to take into account the difference in labour market needs between different sectors and various regions. We know that work is being done, ideas being discussed between industry representatives, farming, hospitality, health sector, particularly, and Immigration New Zealand and Work and Income New Zealand, WINS, to define the parameters of such sector agreements. So the idea is that if there is a sector agreement for a particular role or industry, it should be even easier to get people into New Zealand because that sector agreement would acknowledge and recognize the skill shortage. But really the key change for employers is the need to be accredited before supporting a work visa application. So this will put those businesses that plan ahead properly. This will put them ahead of their competition. Despite the change of date, the postponement of the actual implementation, we really have been urging businesses who rely on international workers to start looking into those changes seriously and start working on their paperwork. And that raising awareness is largely the work we've been doing at New Zealand Shores since the beginning of the year.
Thank you. And that's a really key point, I think, the fact that the date has been pushed out from 1 November, which means we all have a bit more breathing space to get ready for this change. And I think we'd all agree that the security of this kind of information at that government level is critically important, given the recent cyber attacks we've seen and how sensitive some of this data is. So if they're taking time to make sure their IT platforms are solid and secure and reliable, I think we'd all agree that's a good outcome and a good focus. In terms of what businesses can do to get ready, there's, from my understanding, certainly several things that we can do to make sure that there is a smooth transition from the current accreditation process through to the next step of what this will look like next year. From your discussions with businesses, can you talk to us about some of the actions businesses are taking to get ready? What can they be doing today to prepare for next year?
Yeah, something we see a lot with businesses approaching us with questions about accreditation is, why should I look at this now? I only have 2 people on work visas. I'm not looking to recruit anymore. What businesses need to understand is that this mandatory accreditation will also affect them if they need to renew their current staff work visas. It's not only about recruiting. So they need to carefully consider their current and forecasted number of international workers and plan ahead accordingly. What level of accreditation are you likely to require? Standard, premium? Do you contract out your workers? Do you operate as a franchise? Requirements will be slightly different for each of these different tiers. So you need to prepare accordingly. Once again, the risk is to find yourself in a position where not being accredited in time will jeopardize your ability not only to recruit new staff, but also to support your existing staff for their work visa renewal. What would happen then in that case is, if your staff can't renew their visa because you're not accredited yet, or you don't want to seek accreditation, or you got it too late, they will either have to leave New Zealand or stop work, or they will find an employer who can support their work visa application, and you at risk of losing one of your key staff. So as a first step, what we can do at New Zealand Shores is provide an assessment, a free assessment and consultation that will help determine the level of accreditation, and again, discuss an overview of the criteria that INZ will be reviewing.
And certainly part of what is going to be critical for these accreditation processes is having the evidence and demonstration of the commitment to upskilling and training your existing workforce. Learning and development programs can take some time to put in place, speaking from experience. And of course, if you've got things like performance reviews, which you have in place now, that'll be really helpful for showing that you have this commitment to upskilling your workforce. But if you do need some time to get that back end process set up and running so that you're in good shape for next year, the sooner businesses can look to that, certainly the better in terms of getting themselves ready and pulled through. One of the questions, Fabian, that I've been fielding quite a lot from our clients that we're talking to about this is about who it will affect. So what types of visas will be subject to this new accreditation? Can you talk for a minute on the different types of work visas that do exist out there and which ones will be covered by the accreditation umbrella and which won't be affected, like partner visas or study visas?
Yeah, for sure. So the visas that will be affected are the ones supported by the position offered, by the employment. So anyone on an open work visa, say, for example, someone who's got, who has a post-study visa as a result of studying in New Zealand, someone who has open work rights for being the partner of a worker or partner of a New Zealander, anyone with open work rights will not be directly affected unless they need to seek a further visa based on their job. These accreditation changes also do not directly affect anyone applying for residence. So if you want to employ someone who is on an open work visa, they have a residence application in place and that is likely to be approved before their current visa expires, there will be no need for you to become accredited as a result. Now, the visas that will be phased out, there's 6 of them, but the main 3 are essential skills work visa, which is the most common work visa in New Zealand. but also the talent accredited employer, accredited meaning old policy accredited, that will be phased out, and the long-term skill shortage work to residence. These are the top 3 visas that your staff is likely to be on and likely to be affected. Those 3 were meant to be phased out on November 1st. We know that essential skills will remain valid beyond that date. There's still a bit of confusion, not only with us, but within the government, it seems, on whether companies will be able to submit applications for a talent work visa or long-term skill shortage between November 1st, for new entrants, that is. So yeah, keep posted on that.
Thank you. Look, what we'll do, everyone, is go into the question and answer section now. I think there's going to be quite a lot that comes through, and as always, these sessions really come alive when we have questions from the audience to answer and speak to. So if there's something you've been holding on to, something Fabian or myself has said which you'd like a bit more information on, or a really burning issue you'd like more discussion on, please do pop it through in the question and answer session. If you're watching on Facebook, what I'll be doing is going across to Facebook and checking if there are any questions that have come through in the comments there, and Fabian and I will work through them and answer them. So anything that comes to mind, please do pop it through.
There's one I'd like to answer, actually, Sylvie.
Yes, of course, go ahead.
It's probably by far one of the most common. How will our current employer accreditation be affected? Will we need to redo this? I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but yes, you will have to become accredited again under the new system. Your accreditation will not automatically roll out to the new system. There's no automatic rollout from the old accreditation into the new one. However, because you got accredited under the old system, we like to think that most of your paperwork is in place, and you'll only probably need to polish up on the new requirements. What Sylvie mentioned. We know INZ will also put some emphasis, as Sylvie mentioned, on professional development and ongoing attempts to recruit New Zealanders, but also there will be a whole new range of requirements around diversity. How do you promote diversity in the workplace? How this is effectively going to be put in place remains obscure, but we know it will be a key criteria with the new system.
Thank you. That's a very, very thorough answer. Cheers, Fabian. Peter asks, is there a distinction between migrants seeking work with consultancy businesses and migrants seeking labour type work?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is that applying for a job directly with a company as opposed to going through a recruiter?
Off the top of my head, what I'm reading there in Peter's question, and Peter, do send us through a clarifying comment if we get it wrong, is there going to be a difference in the quality of the application from the migrant if they're seeking work with consultancy businesses, so work that sounds like it would be more technical or more complex or more considered, versus migrants who are seeking what we would have historically described as lower skilled work or work that's more labour intensive?
No, it's unlikely to make any difference as long as the employer on the employment agreement is an accredited company and the role is deemed skilled, in shortage, and you're qualified for the role. There should not be any difference.
And would it make sense, or is it correct for me to say that the focus isn't on how complex or hard to do or elite or sophisticated the work is, it's on whether there is a genuine shortage of people who can do that work in New Zealand? And if there is, then those people are likely to be able to, those businesses are likely to be able to source migrants or workers from offshore.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. Historically, Immigration New Zealand has been relying on NSCO, the Australian New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupation, to rank jobs on a scale. And where an occupation sits on the scale is not necessarily a reflection of how in demand a job is or how quickly a visa will be processed. An electrician, for example, is skill level 3, but is likely to have their visa processed more efficiently and more quickly than, say, a finance manager with skill, which is skill level 1, because there's more of a shortage of electricians in New Zealand.
Thank you. Anonymous asks, under the accreditation system, if it is more employer-led, will we have more transparency of the employee's visa status? I ask because a current visa holder only got an interim visa emailed to her 3 days before her visa was due to expire. As an employer, we had no communication. 3 days notice of whether you can continue to employ a staff member doesn't give anyone confidence, and this uncertainty is what has led to some migrants to leave.
As an employer in New Zealand, it is your responsibility to ensure that your staff has work rights in New Zealand. It's a conversation that needs to be had with your staff. So before you take them on, you need to make sure they have a valid visa and keep an eye on their visa expiry date, just to make sure they don't overlook it. Interim visas actually get issued automatically once a new application is put in place and is unlikely to be approved before the expiry date of the other one. So for your staff to get an interim visa emailed to her 3 days before a visa expires is perfectly normal.
Thank you. Russell asks, Fabian mentioned market rate. For our industry, this is way below the median salary referred to in earlier announcements. For example, a service technician earns about $30 per hour, but we cannot find any locally and have already identified staff waiting offshore. I guess the question there would be, is there going to be any allowance made for particular roles or particular needs where the median or typical incomes for those roles are below the figures that Immigration New Zealand are looking at?
So currently the median wage in New Zealand for immigration purposes as of Monday, the 19th of July, is $27 per hour. This not guarantees, but sort of ensures that a person can get a visa for up to 3 years. And also there's other benefits like the ability to support their partner and their kids for suitable visas as well. If a person earns below that threshold, there are still options to get visas, but the rights around the family visas will be restricted, and the duration of the visa as well ultimately would be a bit shorter. It is an issue for certain industries, as Russell mentions, where most people earn 25.50 or 26, don't quite cut it to 27. And the flexibility for business to bump them up to meet the threshold is also sort of hindered by either internal scales or just out of fairness and justice to Kiwi employees who don't make that much on an hourly basis. So sure enough, the government is looking into this because it does affect quite a few industries where there are genuine needs for staff, but we don't really know what it's going to look like in terms of exceptions. Policy is full of exceptions for certain occupations that are deemed low skill, but you can still get someone in if they get that much and this much. So it's likely that will be ad hoc immigration instructions to cater for those particular occupations.
And second question from Russell, how do we collect or store evidence in advance that we cannot get local applicants at the moment from now up until mid-2022?
Whenever you advertise for a role on Seek, Trade Me, or through a recruiter, keep those screenshots, keep that history with the number of applicants, because you will have to show to Immigration New Zealand that historically, no one that applied for the job you posted was sufficiently qualified or experienced or did not quite meet your requirements in any other way. And this is something that all the employers we work with have been doing, keep those job postings.
Thank you. Anu asks, what is the pathway to residency if there is no longer work to residency visas? And when is the last opportunity to apply for work to residence?
So there's two questions there. The work to residence visas, so whether talent or long-term skill shortage, which are the main ones, was not actually that common. I think it only catered for 15% of work visa applicants. Largely, people would seek residence through the skilled migrant category, which is a points-based system and a completely separate application to the work visa. They're essentially run in parallel. So not much of a consequence to people seeking residence. The government wants to keep skilled migrant, which they haven't touched to date. as a main pathway to residence. When is the cutoff to apply for a talent visa or a work to resident visa? It was going to be 31st of October, but like I said earlier, this has not been confirmed. They might push out that deadline to mid-2022 as well, same as essential skills. So yeah, we'll put this on our website as soon as we have confirmation.
Vicky asks, are entertainers' work visas going to get swept up in this?
No, these fall under a different category called specific purpose, and they're not affected by the changes. So no effect on those.
Rachel asks, just for clarity with the new announcement regarding the delay in implementation, does that mean the current date they had on the phase out of current visas or the last time you could apply for essential skills or work to residence being the 31st of October has now changed or waiting to be confirmed? We just answered that question, Rachel. The answer is yes, we're still waiting on dates for those. At the moment, it doesn't look like there's a firm deadline in place. Second question, what will applying for residency look like once the new accreditation is in place?
Again, no change. The key pathway to residence will be applying through the skilled migrant category. So putting in an expression of interest, which is essentially a credibility check for an application. And if you meet the points threshold, you get selected, you get invited to apply for residence and submit all the paperwork to evidence those points, essentially. So we don't know of any change of points or anything like that for skilled migrant. This will remain the pathway to residence for the vast majority of migrants. Now, under the new system, the key work visa will become an accredited employer work visa as a result of the other ones being phased out. There will be a pathway to residence for anyone earning at or above twice the median wage, but currently that is sitting at $112,320 per annum based on a 40-hour week. So this will only be a select few who have that, think of it as a bonus pathway to residence.
Udani asks, what are the costs of the accreditation fees?
To be announced. Currently, the current accreditation policy is no longer in place. The last day to submit an application was the 30th of June, but the accreditation fee was $2,130 to Immigration New Zealand, and renewals every 2 years was $600. The new, as I mentioned, the new policy will have 3 different tiers. It's likely the premium accreditation level will resemble the old one, but again, fees to be announced.
Michelle asks, if we have someone on an essential skills visa that expires in May 2022 and they want to become a resident, should we encourage them to do this now?
So there's no immediate urgency for them to renew their essential skills work visa unless they have documents expiring, which may prompt them an early renewal, for example. Otherwise, they'll have to pay for new medicals, which is the key expensive thing here. They can apply for residence right now. They can put an EY in the pool, but due to COVID, the fortnightly selection that usually occurs under the skilled migrant category has been paused since March 2020, and we don't have a date in mind yet. Nothing's recorded, nothing's confirmed. We're not even sure if it's being discussed, to be honest, as to when that fortnightly selection will reopen. We like to think that the earlier they get in the pool, the more chance you have to be part of the first selection. And we can certainly help with that, or at least cross-check eligibility and offer them some answers. I'm sure they have lots of questions.
Ange asks, my question is around the hourly rate. If they are already on a 2 or a 3 year work visa and want to apply for residency, is it necessary to put them up to the new hourly rate requirement when residency applications are closed at the moment?
What Immigration New Zealand will take into account is the hourly rate in place at the time they submit their residence application. So if they haven't yet, they'll need to be on $27 per hour at the time Immigration New Zealand receives their residence application. So you might have to pay them an extra $1 or $2 if you want to keep them long term.
People are on essential skills visas that still have 3 years to run. Are these visas likely to stay live? Asks Anonymous.
Yeah, 100%. There will stay any visa that was granted under old policy or current policy will remain valid until its expiry.
Anonymous also asks, for franchisors, would each franchisee under the network need to be accredited or just the head franchisor?
I cannot answer that 100%. I would believe that each franchise will have to be accredited in their own right if they all operate as a separate limited liability company. What prompts me to say that is that historically, if you had a group that would you could accredit the group and they're all companies under the umbrella under the same accreditation. But Immigration New Zealand moved away from that a couple of years ago, and each company under a group had to become accredited. So it's likely that under the new policy, franchises operating in a similar manner will have to have each entity accredited separately.
Cherie asks, we have a number of migrant employees currently on talent work visas that are still waiting to meet the 2-year requirement before applying for the talent residence visa. They can only apply for the residence visa at the end of this year or early next year. Can you confirm if their pathway to residence is unaffected by the changes, as there's been some conflicting information regarding this?
Yes, there has been some conflicting information regarding this, that's for sure. They need to be working on that visa for 2 years before they can put in a residence application, which technically leaves around 6 months for residents to process. If they don't meet the criteria to have their residence application prioritized, which is twice the median wage salary or occupational registration, their residence is likely to take 1.5 years or more to even reach a case officer's desk. So they will have to renew their talent visa. Policy actually allows for this. You can renew the talent visa on the basis of having residence in the queue. So that should not be affected by the accreditation changes, no.
Anonymous asks, is there any specification for small companies to get the accreditation?
Small companies would fall under the standard accreditation tier. So any company having 1 to 5 migrant workers over a 12-month period. So even if your company only has 1 migrant staff, 1 person on a work visa, and has no plans to recruit, if that person needs to renew that visa at some point, you will have to be accredited.
Peter asks, once a company does become accredited, how long does the accreditation last? And is there a requirement to have to renew this?
You will have to renew it. Initial accreditation under all 3 tiers will be 12 months. And then the standard and premium levels will see their accreditation renewed for 2 years. Labour hire and franchises will only be 12 months renewals. Again, we'd like to think the renewal process will be smooth and streamlined and obviously cheaper as it is currently, but yeah, fees and policy to be announced.
We've been through 18 odd questions now, we're still 14 to go. So I think we'll pick a few more and then just see how we're doing for time. There's a lot of interest around the topic, as I'm sure everyone can appreciate. Anonymous asks, if a role is well paid and on the skills shortage list, what is the accreditation grouping the employer would need to apply for?
It's not so much about the role, it's about how many international workers you're forecast needing over a 12-month period. So the kind of role you recruit for has no bearing on your accreditation level. It's about the number of people you require.
Penelope asks, if you are a current accredited employer and want to recruit local migrants for a work to residence visa, what is the minimum wage per hour you can pay?
You need to offer them $79,560 per year based on a 40-hour week. That is the minimum threshold for them to be able to apply for a talent work to residence visa. You can still hire them if you don't pay them that much, but they will have to apply for an essential skills visa, not a talent one. Even though you're accredited, you just don't pay enough.
Anonymous asks, what will happen to those employers whose accreditation is due for renewal at the end of this year? Can this still be renewed, or will they become unaccredited until the new system is in place?
That's a very interesting question, Anonymous. The portal for current accreditation closed on the 30th of June, And the new one is probably not due to open until later this year or mid next year. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. Immigration New Zealand decided to close the current policy, and 2 weeks later, they decided to push out the new policy by 10 months. So I don't believe, based on recent documentation and information raised through INZ, that you will be able to renew under current policy. I don't think so.
Nigel asks, under a new accredited employer work visa, will there be greater freedom of movement for migrant workers between accredited employers and regions? Presently, a number of work visas restrict the migrant worker to the specific company or to the specific region.
Yes, possibly. What you're referring to there, Nigel, is what we've been doing a lot of with closed borders is variation of conditions, allowing migrants to move across employers. In some cases, you can do a variation of conditions. In other cases, you have to do a whole new visa. And that is largely based on the role offered, the role currently held by the migrant, and the regions they're moving from into. So the criteria will be the same under the new system, depending what the role they hold and where they work and where they're meant to work. They may be able to easily move over to your company through a variation, or they may have to apply for a whole new visa.
Anonymous asks, how will the quota system be affected with the new changes?
I'm not sure if they're referring to the quota for the number of residence applications per annum. That should not be affected. As a matter of fact, they haven't discussed that for quite some time now.
Thank you. Those were all the questions that came through on this topic through our webinar question and answer portal. Some of the questions we did receive related to personal questions about your own visa status or your partner's visa status. For privacy reasons, we won't be answering or asking those questions here, but please do get in touch afterwards, and Fabian and the team would be more than happy to help with your situation. What I will do is just quickly jump over to our Facebook stream to see what questions are coming through there, and then we should be wrapping up at about 10 to 3 for anyone who's looking for a hard finish today. Cool. Anonymous asks, what will happen to employees currently on work visas who are employed by a business who could employ New Zealand citizens?
At the time of renewing their work visas, Immigration New Zealand might be asking for proof that you have been unsuccessful in recruiting Kiwis. If that's the case, you may not be able to renew their visas, regardless of how long they have spent on the job.
Danielle asks, if someone is on a work visa and they work part-time at 2 different companies, how will this work under the new accreditation scheme?
We've had a couple of these approved as an exception to instruction, actually earlier this year, but it's far from standard. The expectation is that in order to get a work visa, the applicant is offered, is guaranteed at least 30 hours of work per week by one single employer. So it's not standard in policy to work for 2 different employers on one visa, but it can be done in certain circumstances as an exception.
Thank you. Everyone, those were all the questions that we had come through either through the chats on the webinar, through Facebook on the live stream, or in the question and answer session that we've been hosting here in Zoom. Thank you so much again for your time and for joining us today. We hope that you found that useful and informative and has contributed to your thinking about whether your business needs to start getting ready for these accreditation changes coming soon. As I said at the top of the session, it will be posted to the MyHR Facebook page, to the MyHR website, and to our YouTube channel as well. If you do have any questions about any of the content today for myself or Fabian, please flick them through to help@myhr.works. That address again is help@myhr.works. We look forward to having your questions come through and to continuing this conversation over the next 10 months. So Fabian, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.